seen pictures in Japan where they have recreated this whole little Dutch village with many tulips and stuff. But actually, it's more from Asia. So
Well, it's also I don't know what you call this in Dutch, but in the UK we have a flower that everyone thinks is very English. It's called the hollyhock, and that comes from Central Asia as well. So, and you can still see it growing wild there. So we've done the same thing. But I think the Netherlands, for such a small country, you've got so many things that the whole world recognizes as Dutch. You know, you've got klompen, your windmills, weed, tulips, raude.
Mhm.
There's a lot of stuff, dikes.
Yeah. So if you say Central Asia, which countries includes that?
Usually, when people say Central Asia, they mean all of the stans that were in the Soviet Union. So Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. But some people include Afghanistan as well.
Okay.
And stan just means place of. So Uzbekistan is the place of the Uzbeks.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so I suppose it would be Belgistan or something. I don't know. Place of the Belgians.
Ichtus.
Yeah, you can have that.
Nice, Ellie.
So we've got people here who are from Antwerp or in Antwerp, people who are in other parts of Belgium. Is there anyone who's currently in the Netherlands? Nadine? Okay. Oh, and Manon, a few. And then anywhere further away than that? Erin, where are you? Can you unmute yourself?
Oh, yeah. Now I can, yes. I'm in Florida, actually. So it's bright and early in the morning, hence the coffee.
What time is it for you?
It's 7 a.m.
Yeah, you sound like you've got that early morning voice. Oh, thanks for joining us.
7 a.m. Wow. Well, yeah. I think it will be a good start of your day, hopefully.
I'm just seeing all these students going like, what's 7 a.m.? What is that? Maybe you guys are more hardworking. I don't think I ever got up before 10 o'clock in the morning or something. A bad student.
That's the danger with all the online classes. You don't have to get up early anymore. So the whole day just gets pushed back a couple hours.
Yeah.
You need lots of discipline.
But Natanya, you're a midwife. How much of that can you do on Zoom?
Well, maybe a new business of doing long distance midwifery. No, well, there are actually lots of consults happening over Zoom. But I think in general, most people will still go to their midwife. Mm-hmm. But I'm not a midwife yet.
Oh, sorry, yeah, trainee. Oh, I managed to get rid of my cat, but he's just come back. He seems to know when I'm going to give a talk, and he's like, yes, now I can cause complete havoc.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah. And there he goes.
Okay, well, I think we can just start maybe. And then if there are still people who will come, they're free to join at any time. So before we all start, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have so many people join. And yeah, we are really excited to hear this talk today from Chris about why a good God would allow suffering. And to begin off, maybe you noticed Chris is from England, so the talk will be in English. if this is difficult for you, that's not a problem, because in the bottom of the Zoom screen, you can see interpretation. And if you go to the Dutch channel, then you will hear Eline, and she's going to translate everything for you. Dus als je het liever in het Nederlands wilt horen, dan kan het ook gewoon. En dan kun je op interpretatie naar Eline gaan luisteren. Die gaat dat heel goed doen. And otherwise, you can just stay in off or in English. That's basically the same. So we won't waste any more time. We are hosting an event, the Mission Month, for 1 month, where we'll be having many different talks about topics that we think are very relevant right now. And today we will start with Chris, and I will share a little bit more about him. He is from Cambridge in the UK, but he was actually born in Lebanon and Turkey. Well, he grew up there. And he's a writer for both fiction books and non-fiction books. And besides that, he's also a lecturer on the Art Society School. And he knows lots of things about Central Asia, since he has spent many years working and living in that area. But a very fun thing that we discovered about Chris is that he really has a big heart for Flanders and for Belgium and for students who live here. And that's why he's really happy to be a part of this too. And I think we can speak for Chris in saying that he would really like to be here in Antwerp, but we're hoping that next year we can do those things again. Yeah, he will speak on a question why God allows suffering, and he might not give you one specific answer, but he is extending an invitation to us to wrestle with that question together. So yeah, I'm very excited to hear what he has to share with us about it. So Chris, I'll give you the word and you can kick it off.
Great. Thank you very much for having me, Natanya. It's really good to be here. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully you'll have me in a little box somewhere over to the top right corner. So the question today is, why does God allow suffering? And I can give you a really short answer to that. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it could be that we just finished there, but I want to say a little bit more, if that's okay. I think if I was to give someone who is really suffering just some quick, nice, neat little answer, like, because you're worth it or something, I don't think that would really work. And actually, for people who are really going through suffering, I think what we really want generally is not necessarily someone to talk at us, but someone to just come alongside us and be with us in that time of suffering and difficulty. What I can say, though, is that I have experienced some suffering myself. I don't think it's a competition, and if it is, it's not a competition that I want to win. And I'm hoping that if you would say that you're suffering right now, it could be as you go through lockdown or maybe something deeper or darker, we would really love to walk with you in that. So I hope that that's the spirit with which we tackle this conversation. Now, imagine if we'd all clicked on the wrong Zoom link and ended up in Slimmer's World or calorie counters or Weight Watchers or whatever you call it. And imagine if I started talking to a bunch of people who were all trying really hard to lose weight because they think that they need to, and I just say, do you know what? I've just got one of those amazing metabolisms where I can eat anything and I never get fat. That probably wouldn't be very helpful, and it probably wouldn't make me very popular. And in the same way, I think to talk with people about this concept of why does God allow suffering, this isn't an abstract question. This is a lived reality for many people, maybe some of you listening. And so I do want to say that I've experienced some suffering, and I'll be talking about that as we go along. And also, I'm definitely one of these guys that if I'm eating my friet met mayo, you're going to notice it in a few days if I don't do some exercise. So sadly, I can't eat whatever I want and not put on weight. So I think before we go any further, I want to raise the question, first of all, what is suffering? What do we mean by suffering? And I think it's really important that we distinguish that there are different kinds of suffering, and sometimes they're not always as bad or as negative as we might think. In fact, we actually need hardship. It's beneficial for personal growth. A few years back, I was a mature student studying in Oxford, and I ended up getting involved in rowing. And I had a real love-hate relationship with rowing. I mean, I would wake up some days thinking, oh, today, this evening, I know that I've got this 2K test. And when you do a 2K test on a row machine, the idea is that you should go so hard that you couldn't take another stroke. And you feel like throwing up at the end of it. And just the whole day, I would just have this mental clock counting down to it. And races were even worse. I mean, the number of times I would be peeing before a race just out of fear and nerves. And then in the race itself, just in this world of pain. I mean, if you look at the expressions of me and the rest of the crew, this is one of the best pictures I have. I mean, there are some where I really look like I'm giving birth or something. So it was hardship, but also I looked really good as a result of all this training. And I think sometimes we want to have the abs, but we don't want to have the gym. You know, we want to have some kind of shortcut, but actually hardship can be really good for us in some situations. It can help us become more resilient. It can help us become tougher. You may have heard of the famous marshmallow test. This was something that was developed in the 1970s. They would bring in individual kids and they sit them down in a room with one of those mirrored glass observation rooms next to it. And they would tell the child, here's a marshmallow, I'm putting it on the table, you can have it now, or if you wait 5 minutes and don't eat the marshmallow, when I come back, I'll give you another marshmallow and then you have 2. So either you can wait and you can have 2 later on, or you can have 1 now. And if you've not watched some of the videos on this, it's really fun to watch on YouTube or something. You see some of these kids, one of them, she manages to turn her chair away from the marshmallow so she's not looking at it, and you know she's going to win. The little boy who licks the marshmallow and puts it back, you know he's not going to make it through the 5 minutes. And interestingly, they've done some follow-up tests on the people who took these marshmallow tests as children, and they've followed their progression as they've gone into adulthood. And the ones who managed to wait, the ones who've learned to have delayed gratification, were the ones who've done much better financially and in their jobs and so on in life. So the funny thing is that sometimes we expect God to be a combination of these 3 characters. You know, which one of these is God? Let me tell you, none of them. Like, God is not a genie. He's not just there, you rub the lamp and he'll give you whatever you want. He's not the tooth fairy who's there to grant your wishes. And he's not Santa Claus either. In fact, the God of the Bible is described as a father, and a father who disciplines those who are his sons, using the idea of the pater familias in Roman culture, where a Roman father who would be responsible for the whole household, including all the servants and so on, he would have the kids that were his, and he would discipline them. He would put them through a rigorous blend of intellectual and also physical exercise to grow them up as men and women. But then there would also be the children, some of them would be his, but that he'd had with a servant girl or something. And they would be allowed to run around and they wouldn't be given the same discipline because they weren't his official sons or daughters. And so one of the writers of the New Testament draws on this Roman culture of the time and says, God is like a father who disciplines those that he loves, who are his sons and daughters. So sometimes I think we feel that God should just say yes to everything. We should never hear the words no. But let me say this, if you raise a child to never hear the words no, you have created a monster. And I think all of us have been that monster at some point when we're 2, 3, 4 years old. If any of you have got younger brothers and sisters, or You see people with small children, it's a real challenge teaching them you don't always get what you want, and actually that makes you a better person. In fact, there's a wonderful quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was the psychologist who developed the concept of the 5 stages of grief. She said, the most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep love and concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. And that's certainly been my experience. I've had friends who have really lacked sensitivity or compassion because they've never gone through anything really difficult. And it's only once they've gone through hardship that they then start to develop some of those things. The problem is we're raised in a culture that tells us that we can be whatever we want to be and just follow your dreams and they'll come true, and you can just reach for the stars. And in some ways, one of the things that's done to us is I think it's created, particularly in Western culture, this undercurrent of entitlement. We think that we should be able to have everything given to us, and we do become quite demanding. Sometimes it's referred to as first world problems. And I remember talking with one of my friends who's from West Africa, and she said, "Oh, we don't have depression in Africa." Of course, mental illness happens in all countries and contexts. But what she meant was that many people are too busy trying to put food on the table for their kids to worry about their state of happiness. And in some ways, I think we can sometimes become too sensitive and have a lack of perspective and not realize that actually life can be difficult, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can help us become overcomers. I wonder whether your generation are going to be known as Generation C, the ones who went through COVID or Corona. And my hope for your generation is that you'll grow up with less of a sense of entitlement, with more appreciation for things that in 2019 we just took them for granted. Freedoms and the opportunity to just have some people around for a meal in your house, to hug a friend, all of these things. I hope that this really difficult time will make your generation more resilient. And I think resilience is really important, and it's a word that I want to use in this. They say that resilience is when you have a forest of trees that's gone through a hurricane, and at the end of it, it isn't the biggest tree that's standing, it's the tree that's learned to bend with the wind. Resilience is an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. So why don't we just agree at this point that there is some suffering that's good for us, that there's some suffering that can help us become better rather than bitter, although often the choice is ours. But then there's also the self-inflicted suffering. If you're struggling today with a really bad hangover, whose fault is that? Like, it's your fault. Unless somebody spiked your drink, you chose to drink that, and now you are experiencing the results of that. So there is self-inflicted suffering. I went to Aldi yesterday for my weekly shop, and there was no milk, like none. And that is because of Brexit. Now, I didn't vote for Brexit. I'm really anti-Brexit, but we get the results. This is what happens when you decide you're going to cut yourself off from all of your nearest trading partners. So some suffering is self-inflicted. But then there's also actual real suffering. And often this is not the result of our decisions. In fact, sometimes it's quite the opposite. It's the result of someone else's decisions made that will really affect us. So this is a picture of one of my best friends, Ryan, and his wife, Laura, and their four-year-old son, Caleb. And Ryan is someone who I got to know when I lived in Uzbekistan. I was running a silk carpet workshop. I was working with UNESCO, and he was doing something similar with carpets in Azerbaijan and came to visit me. And we became really good friends, and we traveled together quite a bit. And we would geek out over carpets because, he was a carpet specialist. And he ended up starting this amazing project in the south of Georgia, where the people are Azeri speakers. And so he was running this great project, reviving carpet designs and getting weavers in the villages to weave carpets again, because they have this incredible heritage that was being lost. Then they went up on the 4th of July, and they're Americans, so they went to celebrate American Independence Day by visiting this beautiful remote gorge where they could camp and have a really good time. And we're not entirely sure what happened, but it seems that Ryan had taken Caleb off for a walk to give Laura just a little bit of peace and quiet. And there was a young shepherd boy, 19 years old, who was in the area. They took photos of him, which turned out were very important, because this shepherd, he attacked Laura and he started to rape her. And when Ryan came back, he saw what was happening and of course came to rescue Laura, and the shepherd took his gun and shot Ryan and killed him. And then Caleb started screaming because he'd just seen his father shot and killed, and because he was seeing his mother raped. So the shepherd killed Caleb as well, and then he finished raping Laura, and then he smashed her head with a rock, and then he drowned her. And when I think about what the last few minutes of her life were like, this is someone who I knew, someone who I really liked. This is a young woman who had never done anything horrible to anybody. She was a teacher. She was a kind, considerate person. What do you do with that? How do you deal with something like that? And actually, for me, what's helped me as I went through this incredible grief at losing one of my best friends was knowing that this wasn't something that God wanted. In fact, according to the God of the Bible, we sometimes refer to him as omnipotent, this grand sounding sort of Latin name. It means all powerful, but he isn't. He never says that he is, because what God has done is he's bound his own omnipotent hands with our free choice. He gives us free choice. So did God want this to happen? No, he didn't. But this shepherd made the choices that he made, and eventually he was brought to justice. He's now in prison. Ryan's mother wrote an incredibly moving letter to him saying, I want you to know about the lives that you took. And I want you to know that we'll never recover, that our lives will always be so different and so difficult, that every Christmas and Thanksgiving and birthday and all of these things, there will always be this hole in our family. But I also want you to know that as a Christian, I'm choosing to forgive you, and that God isn't finished with you. That actually in the Bible we see again and again, God takes really bad people who are murderers. Moses would be one, David would be another, Paul would be a third, and he uses them and he gives them a second chance. And God can do that with you as well. So we get suffering that is a result of other people who have victimized us and so on. And the reason it seems that God doesn't intervene is because he has given us free choice. And if we live in a world where you can make choices, it's not going to be a world that's always good. You know, when I was a kid, my mum never had to tell me, Chris, why did you share all your sweets with your friends? Now you haven't got very many left for yourself. You should have just kept them. Or like, why did you just lie when I asked you if it was you that broke that cup? You should have, now you're going to get in trouble. She never had to teach me this. I just knew it. So there's something in us that we're really good at making bad choices. And I think there's a degree to which we have to live with mystery with some of these things. I think what was even harder in some ways was the situation with another of my good friends. This is Endre. He's from Norway. He's one of these people who is kind of almost annoying, like really good looking, really good at every single sport you can imagine. A doctor, obviously, and but also really nice. Not often people like that can become quite arrogant, and he wasn't like that at all. And we were really good friends. He just got married, but I was living in Tajikistan, so I didn't get a chance to be at the wedding. But he and his wife were going to come and visit me, and they were going to come as part of a trip they wanted to make through Asia. because they wanted to work as a doctor and nurse in a hospital somewhere in the developing world where they could really help other people. So they were particularly interested in an eye hospital in northern Pakistan. And they lived in the very north of Norway, where you can't go skiing in winter because it's dark all the time. So skiing is something that you do in spring. And just a few days before Easter, in the springtime, he and his wife had gone skiing. This is one of the last pictures taken of him by his wife. And a few minutes later, they were both killed in an avalanche. He was just about to turn 30. He had a whole life ahead of him, so many good things that he could do. And it was so hard for me to know what to do with that. I realized that if I was going to carry on following Jesus, I needed to have space within my faith for mystery, for having unanswered questions, for not knowing why something might happen. And for me, one of the things that was really hard, apart from just the tragedy of losing someone who I really loved, was I just thought the waste as well, like all the good things that he could have gone on to do that he wouldn't get to do. So there's a degree to which we don't understand, things feel random. His best friend, Dagfinn, and his sister, they came to visit me in Cambridge the same year that Endre had died. And his best friend, Dagfinn was going to go with them skiing, but he just wasn't feeling very well. He had a little bit of man flu or something, had a cold. And he said, because I had a cold, I'm alive and they're not. That's how crazy these things can be, and it can feel really random. So what do we do with this? What do we do with seeing really good people suffer and not being able to find any real meaning in that? Well, a lot of religions will take a view of divine punishment. Many religions will say that suffering is because you've done something wrong. So this is the universe, or this is God giving you payback. And I just want to say Christianity is very different from that. Whenever Jesus saw people suffering, he would try and alleviate their suffering, and he would come alongside them. He ate with people who were social outcasts. He hung out with the people who were considered to be sinners, and he never attributed sickness or anything like that to moral failure, which was definitely the worldview at the time. Now, I think it was mentioned before, I write fiction and non-fiction, but I'm a bit of a horrible author. So if you ever read any of my novels, I mean, you don't get a good story with just, woke up this morning, had a great life, went to bed, at the end. So like, I put my characters through some pretty difficult situations. In fact, I've killed some of them off as well. And I have to say, when I do kill off one of my characters who I really love, it's not an easy decision. I've even cried before because I'm like, oh, I don't want you to die, but yeah, that's what's going to happen. I've sometimes imagined, what would it be like if I could enter into one of the stories that I've written, if I could write myself into my own story and become a character? What if I could save someone then? What if, knowing what was going to happen to them, I could somehow prevent it? Well, in a way, that's what the Christian faith is about. It's this idea of God is not just some remote being up in heaven or in the sky or somewhere, but God becomes human. God becomes flesh and blood. God enters our story. And in doing that, he makes himself vulnerable. He experiences hunger, thirst, tiredness, pain, all the things that we experience. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a well-known German theologian killed by the Nazis during the Second World War, he said, only the suffering God can help. So there's this idea that God has come and he's entered into our suffering. He's experienced it through Jesus. I love this picture of Mel Gibson as he was directing The Passion of the Christ. And again, I think it can put sort of first world problems into perspective. I quite like the idea of imagining him saying, oh, someone just brought me a coffee and it wasn't even hot, as he's talking to the figure of Jesus. But Jesus has suffered more than any of us can possibly imagine. And I don't just mean the physical suffering that he went through with crucifixion, but also the spiritual suffering of being separated somehow from his own self. So the Bible talks about God being Father and being Son and being Holy Spirit. So we've got Jesus who prayed to the Father and said, I don't want to go through this. He knew what was coming. He said, is there no other way? And there wasn't. He didn't get his prayer answered. If you ever talk to a father or a mother who's lost their child, they say nothing is worse. And we've got a Father who's experienced that himself, who's lost his one and only son. So he gets it. He understands what suffering is. It's not like he's just some kind of stoic presence out there that's impervious to all of this. In the Bible, we hear that the Holy Spirit helps us in our distress, but we don't even know what we should pray for or how we should pray. But the Holy Spirit constantly is praying for us with groans that can't be expressed in words. So right now, it's not like God is just up there in heaven somewhere and doesn't care what's happening in Yemen. The fact that we're about to see one of the worst man-made famines of our lifetime, something that could so easily have been alleviated. We're going to be seeing starving children on our screens. And only when we start to really see the death toll get high, are we likely to have people respond. And the kind of people who might have been generous 2 years ago, the countries that might have right now, they're tending to focus on their own COVID response and everything going on there. And yet the Holy Spirit is praying with groans that words cannot express, because sometimes words are not enough. Sometimes if you're really struggling or suffering, words simply aren't enough. Before I moved to Cambridge, I was working in a church in London, and the first wedding that I ever conducted, the first couple I married were this lovely couple here, Sam and Emily. And it was a summer wedding. It was really nice. And 3 months later, they were still trying to sign all of their thank you cards for the wedding presents that they got. And they went for a run together, and Sam had a cardiac arrest. I turned up the next day. Emily was still wearing her joggers. She'd been in the hospital all night, and they were still trying to save him. And I was there when the doctors came and they said, he's brain dead. He's stem dead, I think they call it. We're going to be turning off the machine soon. And I was there with Emily and with her family and with Sam's family as they kind of took us into this room, and everyone was just crying, and I was crying with them as well. And I remember Emily just saying, God, I don't know how to do this, but I want to give him to you. Like, I know where he's going, and I know that he loves you, and I know that it'll be good for him to be with you again, but it's so hard to let go of him. And I watched her over the coming months, and she's like, I'm 26. Like, how can I be a widow? Widow is something that happens to old people. Like, what does this mean? And really suffering. And one thing that I can say is that suffering with God is better than suffering without him. I watched Emily go through really tough times, but having loving friends and family and having faith, I think, made a huge difference. Knowing that there was a God who understood, who suffered with her, made a huge difference. And then the wonderful thing, I think, for those people who follow Jesus is we believe that suffering is not forever. We have hope. We have hope for the future. Just after Christmas, my grandmother, who was 101, who loves Jesus, has been longing to go to heaven for a long time. She said, I've just been given a terminal diagnosis. My body is just full of cancer. They reckon maybe 2 months at the most. And it's such an exciting journey. Like I've been longing for this because I really want to see Jesus. I really want to experience heaven. And she did. Dying was awful. I wish that it could have gone faster for her. But now she's where she wants to be. I don't think of her so much as being dead as being upgraded. And so for Christians, there's this sense of hope for the future. I remember hearing an interview once with someone called Cliff Richard. He was considered to be the pop idol of his day, especially in the 1950s. They called him the British Elvis Presley. And he became a Christian quite young, but after he'd become famous. And yeah, he lived this very morally upright life, and was interviewed once by someone who said, look, you're like this sex symbol. Every single woman, at this stage, I think he was a bit older, so every single mum, is in love with you, and you could be living this amazing rock and roll lifestyle, and instead you're this Christian. Like, what happens if you die and you discover that it was, you were wrong, and that actually there's nothing that happens once you die? And he said, yeah, that's a good question. But he said, I don't like who I was becoming. I don't like what fame was doing to me. And I didn't like the way that the friends that I had around me, I was never really sure if they were my friends or why they were my friends. And since I've become a Christian, I feel like I've had a much clearer sense of purpose. I like who I've become. I've seen something change in me that I don't think was me changing me. I think it was God changing me. I've got a sense of peace. I'm not afraid of death. And I have absolutely no regrets. But that's if I've got it wrong. What if I've got it right? So I think I just want to finish by saying, one of the things about suffering with God is knowing that there is hope for a future. We read in the Bible that heaven is not somewhere where people have wings and are playing harps. I think that's this weird cartoon we have. But it's somewhere where we're going to see that there will be no more tears, that there will be no more death, there'll be no more separation from people we love. That's how I'm feeling a little bit at the moment. We've just had a government announcement here in the UK that lockdown is finally coming to an end. They've got a timetable, so it's not all going to happen straight away, but in 2 weeks' time, we'll actually be allowed to meet up with more than one person outside. And then a little while after that, we'll be able to have unlimited numbers of people we can meet up with outside. And then there'll be one household who can come and you can meet with indoors. And hopefully by June, we're going to see the end of all of these lockdown measures. And that gives hope. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I've got hope for what's going to happen at the end of lockdown, but also I have hope knowing that for Ryan and for Laura and Caleb, who went through that awful death, who experienced, I think, the worst possible suffering I can imagine, that right now that's such a dim and distant memory compared to what it's like to be with Jesus right now. And the funny thing is that when the Bible describes Jesus in heaven, it often describes him as a lamb that's been sacrificed. So often Jesus is seen as this sacrificial lamb, but it doesn't describe him as someone who looks whole. I think if you were to see Jesus today in heaven, he will still have the holes in his hands and in his side and in his feet. From the scars will still be there. So as I finish, I just want to say, suffering with God is better than suffering without him, particularly because one day that suffering will come to an end. But that might not be much hope or much comfort to you if you're suffering right now. Suffering is really hard. It's really horrible. It's not something that I would wish on anyone. I would just like to pray for you, if that's all right. And then I'm really happy to take questions as well. So let me pray now. God, I just want to pray that if anyone right now is feeling that they are stuck in a world of pain, in a world of suffering, whether that's mental, physical, whether it's having lost someone through the pandemic or whatever it might be, I ask God that you would come alongside them. I pray that you would give them comfort. I pray that you would give them a sense of your presence. I want to thank you that you know what it is to experience pain, betrayal, hopes that have never been met, dreams that have been crushed. You know what it is to lose others. You've wept at the tombs of those that you've loved and lost. So would you come alongside us now as well? And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much for listening, and I would love to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for being vulnerable and sharing those stories with us. That's really powerful. And also, I really like that you put the emphasis on it being such a hopeful story, and that there's, yeah, it's not the end when we're suffering, but there's something so hopeful to knowing God. So thank you a lot. That was very good. Yeah, like Chris said, we would also like to have a time of questions, because now he's with us, and yeah, he's able to answer some questions that you might be having. So please feel free to send those in the chat, and I can ask them to Chris. And yeah, then we can continue talking about it for a little bit. If there's no more questions, you can feel free to leave after that, or you can hang around. And yeah, we will still have some time in the group to discuss it further. But for now, yeah, please let us know if you have any questions.
I'll just say, I'm just putting, let me make sure I've written that right. Yeah, so I've just put my email address in the chat as well. So if any of you feel like I don't really want to bring my question in such a public way, you can always email me, and I'd be happy to try and, as I said at the very start, I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy to walk with you in your questions. So are there any questions, Natalia?
Yes, we have a question. It's, what does it mean to suffer with God?
I kind of want to ask what you mean by that question if I can, but that maybe isn't totally fair. So if I haven't answered the question because I haven't understood it right, then please rephrase it. I think partly suffering with God means that you're not alone. Interestingly, there's one book of the Bible that is probably the oldest book, they think, that may have been written first. But anyway, I might have got that wrong. Regardless of that, it's a book that is entirely focused on the question of suffering. You may have heard of Job or Job. I'm not sure what you call him in Dutch. But what's interesting is that he has three friends who come and they hear that this guy has gone through everything you can imagine. He's lost all his kids, they all get killed. He's lost all of his livestock, all his wealth, and then he loses his health. So he's got nothing left apart from his wife, and it sounds like she's not particularly helpful either. And they do is they sit with him. And he's sitting in the ashes, which again is in the Middle Eastern culture. That's where you sit when you're and you cover your hair with ash. It's part of showing your grief and your misery. And they're just great. They sit with him in silence, and that's all he needs. And it all goes wrong when they start to try and give him advice. If you read the book, it's written as an epic poem. There's all sorts of long lists of here's where you went wrong, Job. But they get it right originally. So I think suffering with God, one of the most important things is knowing that you're not suffering alone. I would encourage you to be honest with God, bring your pain to him. There are no swear words that God has known. And sometimes I think we have this idea of we have to somehow, be on our best behavior. Some of you may have grown up in cultures where people would wear their Sunday best to go to church or to mass or something. I don't understand what the point is of that, because God knows us. He knows everything about us. So for me, when Endre died, there was a lot of me saying, God, what the fuck is going on? Like, how has this happened? I'm so angry. I'm so furious, and I don't know what to do. And I want to be angry with you because I don't know who else to be angry with. And that's okay. God can handle that. He can handle our tears. He can handle our anger, our rage. I ended up being in a very able to join a rapid response team to go to southern Kyrgyzstan in 2010 to lead a team of Uzbek speakers, and we were helping with trauma counseling in a mini genocide. So these were Uzbeks who had experienced, they were a minority in Kyrgyzstan, and they had lost their houses, all of their property, there was no insurance, and many of them had seen family members killed in front of them. And I remember talking to one man, he had been shot in the armpit. So he'd had his hands up saying, please don't shoot me, and they'd still shot him. He was so angry, and he spent an hour shouting at me. I could feel his spit on my face, was shouting at me and swearing at me, because who else could he do this to? And it was a real privilege for me just to listen and to be a punchbag for him. And it gave me a tiny little taste of how I think God feels when we get angry with him rather than turn our backs on him. So I think suffering with God is engaging with God, involving in talking to him, telling him how you feel, letting him know what's difficult. So I think that's maybe the nearest I have to an answer to that. I hope that helps.
Yes, he added to the question, suffering with God in a practical way. So I think, yeah, you covered that as well, just involving God while walking through it. And yeah.
If I can flip it as well, like, how do you help someone who is really suffering? So I think that's the other practical thing for us, because maybe you're not suffering right now, but yeah, what happens when one of your friends discovers that their family members have died of COVID or something? Part of it, I think, is words are not enough. You know, they aren't. So part of it is walking with someone. Sometimes it's helping them practically, asking them if there's anything that you can do to help them. And it's difficult. Sometimes people want space, and sometimes they want company. Sometimes they want both, and it changes from one second to the next. So I think be gracious with them. If they end up being rude to you, that's okay. Like, that's their privilege to be that. Just love them. Yeah. If you know them well, think about what are the things that they've appreciated in terms of love. I'm the kind of person who really likes a gift. So maybe sending flowers or chocolate, or maybe cooking a meal and bringing a meal around for them is just what they need at that point. Or maybe it's time, go for a walk, and they might want to talk about what's going on. They might not want to talk about it. So these are some of the things that can be helpful. I think advice is generally not helpful. And also coming out with some sort, but you know, there's plenty more fish in the sea. Like, if anyone has just experienced a breakup, that's the worst thing someone can say. I know there are, but I want the fish that dumped me. I think be careful of advice, but be really generous with love.
Thank you. There's another question. Maybe you can read with me if you can open it, since it's a bit longer.
Okay. Do you want me to read it, or?
Yeah, you can.
So you said that you believe God is all powerful, is to bind his hands and give that power up in order for us to be able to have a free choice. Is that the only way to explain suffering and an all-powerful God? What if the mystery about God's ways can unite suffering and an all-powerful God choosing to not intervene at times and let us choose how to live life, knowing that his thoughts are not our thoughts? Yeah, I mean, again, I think I want to emphasize the mystery part. So there are many learned theologians, many extremely intelligent women and men who've wrestled with this, and there is not some simple, easy answer. I think there are things that we don't understand. Often it can, you know, you hear about, I know people who've been so heartbroken that their boyfriend or girlfriend has dumped them, and yet they look in years to come, I'm so glad I didn't marry that person or didn't end up with that person. I'm glad that I'm with the person now. So, you know, sometimes it's a timing thing. An analogy which I kind of don't want to use really, because it's overused, but having worked with carpets, now a decent carpet will look the same on both sides, but with kilims, which is a different form of weaving, you get the front side, which is beautiful, and the back side, which looks an absolute. Do you know what? I told you about Ryan. Let me show you one of the little things that they used to weave. So here's the front. Hopefully it looks quite nice. And here's the back. So I think sometimes we just don't see the full picture, and there can be things that God is doing that are not what we think he should be doing. And yeah, we've just got to trust him on that. So I think the word trust is important in all of this. I would say that I have experienced God's goodness and who he is enough that I want to be able to trust him at the times when I don't understand. Sometimes I think I'm walking by faith. It feels like I'm just putting one foot in front of the other and trusting that God is there and that he's at work.
Yes, thank you. I also got another question, might be one of the last ones. If you still want to ask something, do it now. How do we deal with suffering that has been caused in God's name? In history, you see lots of Christians who have caused suffering in the name of God or Jesus. How do we cope with that, or explain it, or deal with it?
Great question. Yeah, it's interesting. I talked to someone in Ghent who's an Anglican priest, and he was telling me that in 1990 there was a survey in Belgium, a religious survey, and 60% of Belgians called themselves practicing Catholics, and yet 10 years later that was 10%. It's amazing. So in just 10 years, half of the country had walked away from the Catholic Church, and now it's 3% who are actually practicing, regularly going to mass or whatever. And the reason for that was because of all of the sex abuse scandals being done by Catholic priests that became known, and people saying, "Yeah, why am I following this? This is terrible." So I think it's a really, really important issue, and it's not just in the Catholic world. Right now, with evangelical Christians, I'm one, a very famous evangelical preacher and speaker called Ravi Zacharias. He's just been, he just died, but they've discovered that he was taking a personal masseuse with him when he went on these trips, and he was asking for sexual favors regularly when he went to get his massages from various places. A number of women have stepped forward and talked about their stories, without them knowing about each other. Their stories are the same story over and over. So it's a really big issue. The first thing I would say is to acknowledge it. I love what St. Augustine said. He said, "The church is a whore, but she's also your mother." So thing to hear from a saint. But I think I want to acknowledge that the church is made up of sinful people, and I'm one of them. Like, I have a whole long list of things. I have a closet that I don't want you to explore because it's skeletons. So I think we need to recognize, first of all, that the church is made up of sinful people who do sinful things, but also it's worth looking at the fact that the church is the largest voluntary organization in the world. It's the largest starter of schools, hospitals globally. So it's done incredibly good things, but it's also done some really bad things as well. And one of the important things is to make sure that we hold leaders to account. So I think it's important to make sure that there are checks and balances, that there's accountability, and that there isn't a covering up. I remember a friend of mine, she was a single woman, and she was in a large church, and the married pastor, who was a similar age to her, and he made a section towards her that she told the church leaders, and they asked her to leave the church to protect him. That's completely wrong. That's not how it should be. And sadly, I think the whole #MeToo movement has a place in the church as well, because there have been people, often men, who have abused positions of power. So I think we need to acknowledge that the church has caused suffering, whether it's on a epic scale. I think probably one of the worst examples of this would be the Spanish Inquisition, where terrible torture and evil was happening and being done in the name of Jesus. Again, would be another example. So I really dislike Christendom, and Christendom is a term we use to describe that kind of Christian politics, if you like, that governed Europe, and that we see with the storming of Capitol Hill in January in America with this Christian nationalism. I think that's really something that is not from God at all. So I would want to make a distinction between that. But I would also say, at times like that, I just keep looking back to Jesus and thinking, well, if it's about him, what suffering has he caused? What misery? Where has he misused his power? And I haven't done anything. So I'd want to make a distinction there as well.
Thank you. Lastly, I saw another comment from Lance about Saint Anselm, dealt with God's sovereignty and evil in the world. Did you want to ask something about that, Lance, or was it? I think you can unmute yourself if you want, but.
Yeah, I was just making a comment, kind of, that there's an intellectual component to it. You're interested in that resource.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, we haven't seen any other questions coming in. So we're perfectly on time. 1:59. Wow. There is still opportunity for people to hang around, so feel free to stay a bit longer and chat in a smaller group. And if you have other things to do or want to have a walk in the sun, that's fine too. Thank you for being there. On Thursday evening, there will be another talk, which will be from 7 till 8 with Erin, who's also in the meeting. She will be speaking about whether the Bible is sexist or not. So very interesting. So you're invited as well. But yeah, besides that, have a very nice day and we'll see you the next time.
Thank you for having me. It's been, I wish it could be in person, but maybe next time.
Let's hope so.
I'm sorry. Ah, oui. Oh,
There you are.
that was a great moment to stop you interpreting.
You're back.
Thank you, Chris. It was
very good. Wow.
How was it for you, Eileen? Was it difficult?
Yes, at some points it was difficult, but I think in general it was okay. But yeah, there were some points that was very